Well, the Seattle Kraken get Joey Daccord back, but potentially losing another player. We'll talk about that and more on today's game day episode of Locked On Kraken.
You are Locked On Kraken, your daily podcast on the Seattle Kraken, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what do you say, Seattle hockey fans? Welcome to another episode of Locked On Kraken, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where we bring you your team every day, or at least most days when I'm not traveling back from Seattle. And before we continue on, I do want to send our regards to anyone dealing with the fires that are happening in California right now. I was just mildly displaced from time and space, but there are people that are dealing with far bigger issues than delayed flights. So we send our condolences out. I have a good friend of mine, unfortunately, has already lost their home. So we know that this is a huge devastation and want to just take a moment to express, again, our condolences and our support for those going through that. Tough transition here, Zaiem, but we are going to talk some hockey. And, we got some news about Joey Daccord, but also Daniel Sprong.
Yeah, Daniel Sprong, it was the returning hero walking all the way from Vancouver to Seattle, which is why it took like a week and a half between him being signed and playing. And he was a disaster. What he brought to the table was a little bit of scoring punch, but then he was just a turnover machine. He and Burakovsky and Chandler Stevenson were all just horrific in that regard. Well, Stevenson and Burakovsky have big contracts. Sprong doesn't. So he's on a minimum contract. So they placed him on waivers and to send him down to Coachella Valley. He cleared waivers just a couple of hours before recording this. And so he's down in Coachella Valley. And then the other thing that made him kind of expendable was the acquisition of Capo Caco. You now have another depth forward, quality forward, but someone who is very defensively responsible as opposed to someone who thinks like defense is like maybe like a little flavoring, like a LaCroix water. You're like, a little bit of like a hint of lemon. It's like, we'll like think about defense like extra hard on this shift as we, let skaters go by you. So probably drove Coach Bilesma crazy. It wasn't hard to understand why. And so no Sprong for now, at least in Seattle. He could be called up, so we could see him later, potentially.
Potentially. And I think you hit a lot there, including just Sprong, not great with on defense. I did see, though, when I was in Seattle at some morning skates and practices, it definitely was noticeable that he was putting a little bit more effort in there. But to your point, maybe just not the right fit for this Dan Bilesma system. I mean, we're going to talk about what exactly is even realistic with the Seattle Kraken team coming up. I was never opposed to Daniel Sprong, but I did find it a little bit surprising that he was kind of the first move as far as players brought in at that time when, Dan Bilesma and the organization seemed like they were trying to shake things up and send messages. It was like, okay, let's get Daniel Sprong in here. I was like, all right, it's a choice for sure. But obviously a move that just didn't work out. And for me, that just goes back to some of the things that I've talked about on the podcast and with you, Zaiem. It's like these lukewarm movements, I guess, that I feel the Seattle Kraken are making. Like they're making moves because they need to make moves, but are they the right moves to move this organization forward? I'm not convinced. Daniel Sprong seems like the writing's on the wall there, but perhaps in better news for the Seattle Kraken, Joey Daccord coming back. He was dealing with an upper body issue. We had reported on Locked On Kraken that he was making his way back on the ice first on the alternate sheet, then integrating more into practices and morning skates. So this is a good thing. And it goes into a lot of what you and I talk about regarding this equitable split that we continue to be promised in net for the Seattle Kraken, but never quite comes to fruition.
So think about how the narrative has kind of unfolded over the last year and 9 days. going back to last year's Winter Classic, right? Because that was really the day that Joey Daccord became the Kraken starter, and he was the number one guy. And then Philip Grubauer struggled. And then to start this year, Joey Daccord has been very good, and Grubauer has been very not good. And so it's like, yeah, Joey's the number one, Grubauer's number two. Are they going to buy out Grubauer? Like he's done, he's washed. Joey gets hurt. Grubauer gets some consistent starts. He gets, 4 or 5 starts in a row. And as we've talked on a couple times on this episode, Erica, when Grubauer gets more play and consistent starts, he tends to play better. And that is, again, that's what we called it. We called it before it happened, and it's happening, right? Even the losses against Edmonton and New Jersey, those weren't his fault, right? You see the 5 goals Edmonton scored, and you're like, oh man, 2 of those were empty net goals, and he's been really, really good. And so that kind of like begs the question of like, okay, well, now what happens? Because Joey was signed to a long-term or a longish term extension, and so he's on the team for the foreseeable future. Grubauer may or may not be bought out this summer. So the other thing is maybe you showcase Grubauer a little bit for an offseason trade. I don't think it would happen trade deadline, but it's possible. Like, it's a big contract, but the cap is going up, and if you're like, well, no GM would be that irresponsible to make a move like that. GMs make a lot of weird. We've seen worse. We've seen much worse.
Yeah, and I just think that I don't know that I would say Philip Grubauer has been really, really good. I mean, the quality starts is just one indicator. I agree that not everything has been on him. And I think for me to kind of feel like we're getting really, really good from Philip Grubauer, or quite honestly, any of our goaltenders, we really need to see them stop dang near everything that isn't an empty net goal. Now, is that realistic? No, especially given the defensive issues that we've talked about. And we'll talk about Columbus a little bit and why I think personally Joey Daccord might start this game. You know what? Let's just talk about it now, because I do think that Joey Daccord, as you and I have talked about, he's a little bit good in, as I say, tight spaces or traffic in front of the net, kind of right in that blue paint area. And that is something that Dan Bilesma, he put us on notice about in his, his media availability today, that's what Columbus brings. They're strong. They're the aggressors. They're a solid defensive team. And those are things that the Kraken aren't. So I do think that not just getting him back into the game, but also because I tend to think Joey Daccord's a little bit better, as I say, again, in tight spaces, we'll probably see him. So, but again, I think it's the breadth of work. I think it's that you do need Philip Grubauer to get those consistent starts, as we've talked about on the show before. And if Joey Daccord is your number one, then is Philip Grubauer, are you going to sacrifice starts for Joey in order to give Philip Grubauer what he needs to be his best? I don't think that the Seattle Kraken have to do that. I don't think there's any indication that Joey Daccord won't be able to sustain what he has. What I do think we need is a goaltender that will keep us in a better salary situation, that can be a proper and reliable backup for Joey Daccord. And Philip Grubauer, I think that time may have passed. And quite honestly, he probably deserves better than just that from the Seattle Kraken. Things just haven't panned out. His injuries have come at odd times. And during those times, Joey Daccord has stood up. And I do think Joey Daccord deserves, if it's not going to be an equitable split, the lion's share of the starts. That's kind of my take on that. But again, we didn't hear explicitly what would happen in net today, as the Seattle Kraken are going to take on the Columbus Blue Jackets, who I love this, especially given off-air conversations you and I have had. Dan Bilesma said it's a meat and potatoes team. They play with aggression around the cage. They get 5 or 6 chances in front of the net, and that's huge. Rebound control, I do think, has been better with Philip Grubauer, but it's not great. But again, I want to stay away from the goaltenders in that last comment from Bilesma, the 5 or 6 chances, because that comes down to whether or not the Seattle Kraken are going to put themselves in position to help defend the net. And what I mean by that is specifically far post. We're a terrible team. We get lost puck watching. We leave our goaltender, regardless of who it is, out on an island by themselves. How many in the last just handful of games, Zaiem, have we seen Philip Grubauer make an amazing first save, just diving, sprawling across the cage just for the rebound to be lifted over his stick? The defenseman there with him who commits to keeping the attacker out is also now not in the best position to retool themselves or to recover, but then there's nobody else there, not the other defenseman, not any of the 3 forwards on that back door. That drives me up a wall, in case you can't figure that out. And that's a huge problem. And that is going to be something that the Seattle Kraken are going to have to figure out, regardless of, Zaiem, if it's Joey Daccord in net, if it's Philip Grubauer in net, if we bring back Barton Jones, Alex Stetson, Chris Drieger. I mean, you could pick anyone, and that could be the issue for tonight's game.
Yeah, I mean, so much of goaltending is the defense in front of them, the player in front of them, and the goaltending gets the lion's share of the blame.
Right.
To your point about Stezka, he was sent down to Coachella Valley, so it's going to be Grubauer and Daccord tonight. So Daccord looks like he's definitely ready to go. So we'll see. I would guess probably Daccord tonight, but also you're right. I said Grubauer was very, very good. When you've been eating like McDonald's every day, and then you like go to Applebee's, and you're like, oh man, this Applebee's is like, this is the greatest restaurant. That's kind of how it's felt. So
yeah. I mean, yeah, comparative to what we've had, sure, but in the grand scheme of things, maybe not. But again, we're going to give you some keys to tonight's game. But first, we have to talk about something that really, quite honestly, grinds my gears, burns my grits. And but it comes down to the numbers. So I'm going to ask a question that I already know what my answer would be, but it's worth talking about, Zaiem. And we're beyond the halfway point, or I guess just about at the halfway point. So that means, is it time for the old Tankaroo? We'll talk about that and more coming up on today's episode of Locked On Kraken. Today's episode of Locked On Kraken brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. If you are an everyday or an OGer, you know I love the Game Time app. Always have it on my phone because if you want to ball on a budget, go to your favorite theater performances, concerts, or sporting events, but you want to make sure that you're getting the best deal all the time, or maybe you're just planning things last minute, you can find it all on Game Time. Game Time has made it even easier to get tickets to your favorite events with a new feature called Game Time Picks. This feature filters out all of the fluff, Zaiem, so that it shows you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Another thing I personally love about Game Time is that, again, you can have that toggle feature where you see the all-in pricing. So again, you can ball on a budget. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply, but again, you can create your account by heading over to Game Time, download the app, and then redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. Thanks as always for making Locked On Kraken a part of your daily destination. Erica L. Ayala here alongside Zaiem Beg, and it is a game day episode here at Locked On Kraken. The Seattle Kraken couldn't quite get it done on the homestand, Zaiem, so looking to see if they'll get a new swagger on the road, but that's going to take a lot, and it's going to take a lot for this team, Zaiem, to even really be a playoff contender. We talked, you and I, last time we were on the show about the playoff odds. So let's get the update. You lose 2 games, Edmonton and New Jersey at home. So what's the deal? What's the 4-1-1 on whether the Seattle Kraken can make the playoffs?
So the Kraken have sadly fallen to 0.7% chance of making the playoffs per Money Puck. I haven't run the numbers to figure out what that would be in terms of like what shuffling a deck of cards. It's a pretty convoluted sequence of things that needs to occur. So in order to make the playoffs, you really need to hit about the 100-point mark. That is both conveniently a round number and also just like a really good barometer of that. And the Kraken currently do not sit anywhere near that. They need to go. So if they want to hit that 100-point mark by the end of the season to get into the last playoff spot, I'm not talking about the number 1 seed. I'm not talking about just to get into the playoffs. 100 points, which is how many points the Kraken had the year they made the playoffs. They need to go 31-10 for the rest of the season. And that point percentage would be on par with, that would be one of the 10 greatest seasons in NHL history. And I don't want people to get upset with me. I don't want angry phone calls and letters. But I think that I'm going to say that the Kraken are not one of the greatest teams, 10 greatest teams in NHL history. I know that's really brave of me to say that, but I believe that to be true. And
yeah, I think that's probably accurate. That's fair.
Yeah. So unless they are that team, then the playoffs they're done, right? The playoffs are no longer attainable. It is January 9th, and we're talking about playoffs. I think there was even maybe a little bit more hope in the inaugural season. Maybe not. Maybe at this point they were pretty buried. But this has certainly been a bottom 2 season so far in the short Kraken's history.
Yeah, it's not a hot take, I don't think, at all. I think, holding on to hope, it seems every day it becomes more and more of a fool's errand. But, it is something that we hear the team. I was able to talk to Jared McCann a little bit after he scrummed with us after the most recent loss. And I think it's really I don't know what the word is. It's not, I don't want to say it's surprising. I don't want to say it's, delusional, but there is a lot more positivity than I was expecting from a team, quite honestly, that doesn't seem to have the juice. And speaking of the juice, I thought I had the clip ready here, but I apologize, I don't. So I'll just have to go off of memory here. Dan Bilesma, when asked about what the next 41 games look like for this club, he said the focus is narrow-minded. He started the comments after, his little Bilesma stumbles, which I love because it's like he knows what he wants to say, but is trying to think of be very thoughtful in how he delivers what he wants to say. So I personally love it. So a few grunts, a few groans, definitely, the Bilesma head shake. And then he goes on to say, it's clear to everyone we're not where we want to be at this point and time. And we have 41 games to change it. And so although he said all of the things that I've already mentioned about Columbus, which again, we'll talk about in the next segment as we close out the show, he wants his team to be focused on them. Now, those are things that you say. Those are logical things that you say when you have a team that's not performing the way you want, when you have a finite amount of time to complete a goal. And I could get down with that, Zaiem, if it wasn't for the fact that in the majority of the other 41 games this season, the Seattle Kraken have not been able to accomplish that. Am I wrong? Am I wrong to be frustrated?
No, if they had been able to accomplish their goals, they probably wouldn't be, dead to the playoffs in January. So I think that deserves a lot of criticism. But then also, what do you do if you're Coach Bylsma? Because he wasn't handed this roster. He didn't sign a certain forward to a roster crippling deal for the next 7 years while being by far the worst skater in the NHL. That wasn't his choice. Right. He didn't sign Andre Burakovsky to that deal, right? So what is he supposed to do? All he can do is just do the best he can with what he's been given.
That's
it.
I don't think doing the best I can with what I got.
So all you can do is play the hand that's dealt to you as far as Coach Bylsma goes. And tanking is tough because like players and coaches don't want to tank; they want to play hard. It's just front offices. Yeah. But then, how do you deliver that edict? But it is probably what's best for the long term for this franchise, and we can get into that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I truly hate even bringing up tanking. And you mentioned a very sound, logical thing, separating this concept, this notion that, quite honestly, I think we've gotten too comfortable with in sports about losing intentionally. But I want you to break down just some of the numbers on why this might be the thing to do for the Seattle Kraken. And then I will, of course, as I am wont to do, offer a counter narrative before we get to our next segment.
I can't wait. So, I mean, look, when you look at the Kraken roster and you just look at it in a holistic sense, take away the bad contracts and the bottom part. If you look at who the best players are, it's Jared McCann and Matty Beniers and Shane Wright and Brandon Montour and Vince Dunn, right? Two of those are defensemen. They're not going to be generating a lot of your goal scoring in general. I mean, the relative defensemen, sure, but not to forwards. And so Jared McCann leads the team in points, and he has 29 points, right? So of all the leading scorers of their respective teams, that 29 points is the lowest of any team, right? So they don't have that elite offensive talent that you need in the NHL. And the unfortunate part is it's really hard to find that talent except at the very, very top of the draft. Because if you're just Jared McCann's your best player, then this is what happens. Then you have seasons like this.
Exactly. Not to mention, just I want to interject here before you continue, that as we've talked about before, I do feel that just because of the nature of this roster not being built the way Bylsma perhaps would like it to be, but also the other lines having more chemistry, it feels like Jared McCann is placed on this sinking island with Chandler Stevenson and Andre Burakovsky, who I know we're going to talk about as well.
That's a fair point. But even if you move Jared McCann off it, it's not like, I mean, he's lighting up the score sheet relative to other Kraken, but he's not lighting up the score sheet relative to other top elite players on their team around the league.
Right.
And you look at who are the MVPs. You just look at the very elite talent. It's Nathan McKinnon, first overall pick. Connor McDavid, first overall pick. Patrick Kane, first overall pick. Austin Matthews, first overall pick. The franchise-altering players, Sidney Crosby, Alex Ovechkin, first overall picks. Like, it's hard to find elite talent except at the very, very top of the draft, and you can't get to the very top of the draft unless you lose a lot. And so the question is, do you want to be in this melange of like kind of mediocre, maybe we'll make the playoffs, maybe we don't, and maybe Matty will emerge, maybe Shane will develop, and maybe Berkeley Catton, and you're hanging these hope on these guys who they're good, but are they franchise altering versus future player, if you can get the Macklin Celebrini or any of the players that I just mentioned, if you can draft a Nathan McKinnon then now your franchise trajectory is completely different. And now you can start thinking about winning Stanley Cups in 3 or 4 years. Right now, I don't really see this team winning a cup in 3 or 4 years unless something happens like them drafting a superstar.
Right. Yeah. And to your point, you only get that if you are able to be at it really, in those top picks. So we do know the Seattle Kraken have had a number 2 pick. They've had a number 4 pick. Both of those players playing center in Matty Beniers and Shane Wright. This team, or maybe this front office, does tend to like to try and build up the middle. We've heard that since day one of the Ron Francis era. And I do love the defensive responsibility that comes with playing centerman. Not all centermen, though, are going to be some of those top talents that you talked about, at least when we're talking on the offensive side. And whether we want to believe it or not, this Seattle Kraken team needs to be retooled to be able to perform at even, a 10, 15% better offensive output than we've seen in the last handful of years. Yes, we can love their hard work, the Ryan Donato P&V sandpaper approach. I personally love it. I really do. And I've said it about the Berkey basket. Capo Caco, I think, plays a fantastic game that helps elevate our game, but it's not elite level scoring. It's not the pucks on the stick. Everyone stops eating their hot dog, drinking their beer because they want to see what this guy is going to do. We don't have that. We just don't. And that's fine. But if you're going to play that way, you have to have a roster that constitutes that and players that are going to commit to that. And that might be the rub. But we're going to talk about some of that because we do have a game. We have a game today, Zaiem. And so we're going to get into some of the keys that we think are going to be important. Probably have heard them a few times because the keys, I don't know, they keep getting lost somewhere. The Kraken keep losing the keys, so we're going to keep mentioning them. And also shout out some players that we'd like to see be top performers. That's coming up on Locked On Kraken. Today's episode of Locked On Kraken brought to you by our good friends over at FanDuel. And listen, we know that we've got NCAA, we've got NBA, but of course, FanDuel wants to let you know that the NFL playoffs are here, and there's no better way to get in on all of the action, whether it's big upsets or game-winning drives, than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200, Zaiem, in bonus bets, win or lose. The FanDuel app gives you everything that you need for live bets, same game parlays, and so much more. And it'll be right there on the same page where you place your bets. So just visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $200 in bonus bets. I mean, are you going to put a bet down on whether the Seattle Kraken will make the playoffs? I mean, go check it out if you really want to. You can do stuff like that over at FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season, at least in the NFL, unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL, and of course us here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Yeah, another year of awkward FanDuel ad reads, because it's like, nope, don't look at the future bets for us. But Zaiem, jokes aside, let's get into the keys to this game. So it's Columbus tonight. I'll do just a quick run through of what we know about these teams coming into tonight's game. I mean, again, this is a Columbus team that Dan Bilesma is preparing his team to expect them to be scrappy. They have 42 points on the season, 18-17-6. They are 6-3-1 in their last 10 games. But similarly to the Seattle Kraken, especially as of late, a few players coming in and out of the lineup. That was something that Dan Bilesma also said today. Hey, we have to focus on ourselves because we really don't know what is going to be on the ice. So we have to just control what we can do. That has been a handful for the Seattle Kraken this season. But Zaiem, what are a couple of your keys to tonight's game from the Kraken perspective?
Yeah, as you said, the keys are getting lost. They dropped them in the snow. We still have snow, right? Is that a thing? We haven't had snow in Seattle in years.
You know what's wild is as I sit here now, it's snowing. It's snowing in Tulsa.
Really?
I know.
Wow.
I know. If I had the window behind me, I'd show you. It's actually kind of
Yeah.
beautiful. If it wasn't so cold, I'd be into it.
Yeah. So I guess snow still exists. That's great. And yeah, the keys get lost and they fish around and then they finally find them. And by that time they're down 1-0 or 2-0 because the first key and the most important key is, start on time. Get early starts. This is literally an early start because this starts at 4 p.m. Pacific instead of the usual 7 p.m. So, the Kraken can't be in the mode of like, well, the game is going to start in a couple of hours, which is how they've approached their last couple of games. Had they played the full 60 minutes against Edmonton, because they ended that game so strongly, they win that game, and if they spotted the Devils a goal after just getting absolutely caved in to start the game, and then they came on, but now you're down a whole goal. You're just throwing away wins when you do that. And so it is a consistent pattern with the Kraken this year is, getting started on time. I remember last year we had the opposite problem where it's like, oh, the Kraken were blowing 3-goal leads. There was that game with Edmonton and against Vancouver and especially early part of the season. And now it's the opposite. It's like, well, they're giving up the goals early and then they're playing well late, which is more exciting, I guess, because you get the multi-goal comebacks, but as opposed to the multi-goal losses.
Yeah, I guess it's something. It's different.
The other thing I would say is stay out of the penalty box. The Kraken did do a good job. Columbus has the 10th best power play, I'm pretty sure. So that's one thing that they have been pretty good at. Although I saw a stat that the Kraken have lost every game this season when they have committed no penalties. So maybe the key is take an early hooking
just
call.
take a few.
Yeah. Let's not do that.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Yeah. I there's so many things with the Seattle Kraken team. And I've said it before, because I really, Zaiem, I can't get over these numbers. The Seattle Kraken, when they are trailing after 2 periods, after 40 minutes of hockey, are 2-20-2. That's horrible. So as much as it is about starting on time, it goes back to that momentum that we would always hear from Dave Haxtell that he never believed carried over from game to game. Maybe every once in a while he believed carried over from period to period. And that's what you need, especially if you are winning the game early on. Now, Dan Bosma tells us he's not convinced that the first goal can win you a game, but it's how you respond to your point and getting the early start. Okay, so we've talked about that. Again, some of these are going to sound like the greatest hits, the greatest hopes, not the greatest hits, but the greatest hopes. Because we mention them all of the time. And you have another one here. Again, it goes back to, I think your next key for me goes back to also consistency.
Yeah, it's just as you say, it is, if they don't start out well, if they're trailing, then the game slips away. And so to the previous segment, what is the goal of this franchise at this point? Are they trying to just figure out for next year, because it sounds like that's where they should be. I think there might be some delusion in the locker room with specifically Jaden Schwartz and Vince Dunn, because they're on the 2019 Blues team, that they were in a slightly better position than the Kraken were in that year. And then they went on one of those ridiculous, unprecedented, historic runs. They went 30-10-5, and then they end up winning the Stanley Cup. And so if you're Jaden Schwartz in that locker room and you're trying to tell him like, no, we're done. Or Vince Dunn in the locker room.
Okay.
Yeah, it's like, hey, buddy, I remember 2019. My name is on the Stanley Cup. And
they're
we didn't
just
get
like,
that by giving
okay.
up in January. Yeah,
They're
right.
just like,
So
hold my beer. They're like, hold on, where's the aux? Alexa, play Gloria. Like, that's it.
yeah, exactly, right. And so I think if especially Jaden Schwartz, is not on this team, maybe this team feels a little less like maybe we can't do it. But man, and Schwartz is such a leader, and so I can totally see the team getting inspired by him and being like, I know what, I've done this before. I've been rock bottom, and by the end of the then I was at the mountaintop. I don't know if those are his inspirational speeches go. It's kind of weird to think of him as like a fiery guy, but let's pretend, and everyone's like, yeah, that's a great, right? When in reality, they're 0.7% to make the playoffs, or 2.5 points, 2.5% if you go by FanDuel. I just looked.
Yeah, I'm with you. I don't know that Jaden Schwartz is going to be a guy that's like fired up. He's like, hey guys, we can do this. I think he does it through his actions. We've heard even in today's media, Dan Bosma saying a part of what we like about Jared McCann is that he's getting to the net. We focused on that. But you know who always does that? Jaden Schwartz. So it's those habits that you're talking about, getting them for more than one player at a time. Jaden's our go to the net guy. I think Shane Wright is so responsible for the most part when it comes to passing. The passing looked like crapola, especially against New Jersey. I was like, are we even trying to move the puck forward? Like, I don't know what's going on. It was just like errant passing for no reason, passing just to pass and not to attack. I think Shane Wright and his line are the attack line. They very seldom are making moves that are not getting them closer to the net front. But it has to happen in more than just those mini silos, aka the lines. So as far as some players, just real quick, I mean, it goes to a lot of what we said. Stevenson and Berkey have to step up. They're not playing to their contracts. These are two players that the Kraken have put a lot of faith in. Do I have to say it? Eggs, Berkey basket, let's go. Not a Birkin, that's something else. This is just, we're not getting enough from these guys. And I do want to reference something that we heard from Jessica Campbell in our exclusive interview. I'm picking Maddie Beniers because, according to Jessica Campbell, she and Maddie sat down, and 2025 is the year of Beniers. Now, is that going to get the Seattle Kraken to the playoffs? Probably not. However, if Maddie Beniers can do some of what you just mentioned, Zaiem, get that consistency, build good habits, become infectious and contagious in doing things the right way so that it not just permeates through his line, which, again, he has Jaden Schwartz on his line. He has Capo Caco on his line. I think they're playing fine. If anything, I think they've helped elevate his game and to steady his game with some consistency, but you need it throughout the lineup. And that, I think, also goes to leadership. And I'm not talking about coaching, although I don't think they're completely off the hook here, but being able to have that peer-to-peer, there's something missing in the sauce this year. I don't know if there's enough time, but I guess we'll find out tonight, Zaiem. But, this is going to be an interesting game for the Kraken. They are teetering dangerously close to being completely mathematically eliminated. And I know I mentioned I was going to bring my counter up earlier, but I'll say it now as we close out the show. I personally just would love, and this doesn't have anything to do with the Seattle Kraken, but I like the gold plan. Once you're mathematically eliminated, say the Seattle Kraken are mathematically eliminated tonight. If they want a shot at the number one draft pick, then win as many games after you're eliminated as possible, because then at least hockey fans still get good hockey, and we are not suffering as fans/podcasters to come up with keys to the game when clearly the team doesn't want any of the keys. They just want a lottery pick. So anyway, those are my thoughts. But Zaiem, let us know what you have cooking as we get ready for another Kraken game.
Well, so on Davy Jones' Locker Room, Glenn Dreyfus wrote a wonderful piece about the Professional Women's Hockey League, who does do the goal plan. And one of the many things that I think the PWHL does better than the NHL, because women's hockey is a great product. And so they were in Seattle. Yeah, I mean, welcome to the family. I know, but maybe not everybody watching knows yet. So, so really, really happy with that piece there. And we're just going to be continuing covering the Kraken. I'll probably do some Four Nations coverage because Capo Caco is going to be, playing in the Four Nations tournament. But really check out the piece that Glenn wrote about the takeover game in Seattle. It was really a wonderful recap of a really wonderful day of hockey in Seattle.
Absolutely. And again, Jessica Campbell, the full interview we will have eventually on Locked On Kraken. But make sure you check out the Women's Hockey Report. Rachel Donner and I host that show, and it airs for you on the Locked On NHL channel every Saturday. So you best believe we're going to talk about the PWHL Takeover Tour. They just had another stop in Vancouver last night as we're speaking on Thursday. And I got a little bit of a scoop on what the PWHL is looking for in their RFPs that they have. They have, requests for proposals out for expansion. What are they looking for, including, is it a non-starter if they're looking at a city or an area where their PWHL team would have to share with not just an NHL team, but also an NBA team, which of course we are likely to see that happen in Seattle in the coming years. So we'll have that and so much more. But for Zaiem Beg, Erica L. Ayala, be kind to yourselves, be kind to one another. If you're in Tulsa, Oklahoma, hey, prepare for some snow. Again, if you're in California, our thoughts are with you. But everyone, be kind to yourselves, be kind to one another. And it's a game day. So we say, hold fast, stay true, and let's go Kraken. We'll catch you on the next episode. Peace out, everybody.